Okay, this is a very simple idea. I'm just going to play Skarner until I win a game, and that's going to happen in the background, and while that happens, I'm just going to give you my thoughts on Skarner. So first, I'm going to talk about what seems to be just a huge failure with this champion, in my thoughts at least, and it's your best and worst ability on this champion, it's your E. So fixed duration charge for 2.5 seconds. You start very slow, you ramp up to a speed that's quite high. If you grab an enemy during this charge, you suppress them. If you slam them into a wall, you get an extra stun. The way that this reads is if you pick up an enemy, you will finish your charge with them suppressed in your arms. Now the way that it actually plays out in game is you get about half a second from latching onto an enemy to being able to veer them into a wall, or your pincers will let them go. Which means that your 2.5 seconds gets cut down to half a second as soon as you catch somebody. It doesn't really make much sense, and it makes your best zoning and displacement tool, that's supposed to be like the identity of your character now, I assume, just be way weaker than it appears to be. The reason for this is quite simple. It's half a second of displacement unless you hit a wall. It gives you too many restrictions to be useful unless your team is so far ahead that that half second and displacement gives you such an edge in a fight that you were probably going to win it with any other champion. Because the benefits that you get from your other abilities are so negligible that your power budget has to be in this ability. And it just doesn't appear to be the case. Now what's even more frustrating is on the League of Legends wiki, your E, your impact ability, reads, if a target has been grabbed before the first 1.75 seconds of the charge, the remaining duration is set to 1 second and set to half a second otherwise. The charge does not ramp up in speed while a target is grabbed. The fact that this is an intended mechanic just makes me actually depressed, because I don't understand why you're punished for grabbing an enemy in an ability that's where most of your power budget is. You're putting way too many restrictions on where you need to start your charge and where the enemy needs to be next to a wall in order for this ability to work. Now why do I say that the power budget is in the E and the other skills just don't pick up the slack? Your W is literally just a German W. German W has been discussed and widely accepted to be one of the worst basic abilities in the game. It's a very small slow. The damage doesn't even matter if I'm being honest from Skarner. It's just a slow, okay? So your other abilities have to do a lot of heavy lifting because it's just a slow. It's very durdly. So we have an unreliable E. We have one of the worst basic abilities on your W. What's our Q like? Our Q makes us a champion that is already intrinsically slow, has no speed ups in their kit outside of an ability that goes through walls, and is very hard to hit. It's very much in a straight line. People knock you out of it all the time. What does your Q do? Your Q makes you pick up a rock and stand still for like a split second. And then you get to slow people with it, or 3-hit passive. Because your Q makes you take a rock up, you space yourself. You literally space yourself by pressing this ability. I don't know who thought that a melee character that has no speed up once you're actually fighting somebody needed an ability that makes you stand still. And not only that, but coming up, your ult does the same thing. So you're a character that was reworked, and in the pre-rework, we understood how to be a sticky champion. We have forms of CC, we have a speed up, we have a Q that we can press that we can actually auto space with, because it doesn't take a lot of space, it doesn't even take an auto attack, so we mix it in with auto attacks, we mix it in with the speed ups, so that we're spacing the enemy, we're making sure that we're staying ahead of them. The new Skarner, if you manage to stay ahead of an enemy, it's because your damage is so negligible that they're literally ignoring you and killing your teammate while you're just peppering them with a little slow. It is actually abysmal, the design of this ability. Now coming up is your ultimate, and the only positive that you can say about it is you're invulnerable to CC while you're charging it. But the problem starts with the fact that you're charging it, it's directional, the amount of people that are going to be able to dodge it is huge. The it doesn't make sense to add such an unreliable ultimate to a character that's already unreliable because of how slow they are. And the tiny stickiness attachment to your E. It doesn't make sense to give a champion power budget in a basic ability that is hard to hit, that doesn't function the way that you think it does, and then give them an ultimate that's one of the most unreliable ultimates in the game. Now, stemming from the issue of your abilities being quite weak, at least in my perspective, your build is basically relegated to being a tank. Because of how you only get really four auto attacks, maybe your boulder tosses, your W, your ult. So you get like 7-8 instances of damage. They're split ADAP evenly, QE, attack damage, W, ult, magic damage. So no matter what you do, because of how few instances of damage you do in a fight, building bruiserish attack damage oriented just doesn't really make sense. Which means that you're only left with tank. Now the problem with tank champions in general is, at least in the jungle. In top lane it's a lot different. You get base levels, you get a lot more money. In jungle, the problem with tank champions is your income is so limited that your 1 and 2 item spikes are the most important thing on your champion outside of how well you gank pre-6. So the problem is, there doesn't seem to be an item that gives you enough value with Skarner to merit picking Skarner. And once you get past 2 items, which is where you're supposed to be the strongest, you start getting outscaled harder than any other tank because of how unreliable your skills are and how close you need to commit to the enemy. If you start committing and you fail your commitment on Skarner, you're just dead. Your team loses their jungler, they lose a big objective. And the longer the game goes on, the worse your champion becomes. And it's not like you're strong early either. Now what I would like to see is 1 or 2 changes to the E ability before any damage numbers get changed, just to actually see if you can live out the fantasy of this champion and it works with an item discovery that would be made by people way smarter than me. And the 2 things that I would change, or one of the 2, is if you start the charge and you grab somebody with your E, I want there to be a full 2.5 seconds of suppression because that's what the ability tooltip reads. That's not what it's supposed to read. I want that to be changed so that there's no bad feeling left around for the game just doesn't function the way that it's supposed to. Because that would actually allow you to play more like a Lee Sin, where you section off somebody at the beginning of a fight, you give them very little, if any, chance of responding if they're not paying attention. If a Lee Sin flash ults you or Q flash ults behind you, the second that they start queuing up ult, you can't respond to it anymore. So I want that. And I feel like that would actually lead to the champion fantasy that people thought it wouldn't have once reading over the ability. The other change that I would probably like to see, although I understand why it's not in the game considering that it's a fixed 2.5 second duration ability, your ganks are not as oppressive as the ability makes you think, because if you spend half your time traveling through a wall, the amount of time that you have to attach to an enemy is so small that you lose the effectiveness of your best ability, best zoning and crowd control tool, just getting to the gank. Which would be fine if you had damage, but you don't really have damage without this ability of 2 seconds of CC, the 0.5 of grabbing, the 1.5 of stunned against the wall. So if you're coming into a gank, I would like it if at the very least, for every portion of a wall that you traveled through, it just extended the range of your ability. I understand why it doesn't do that, because it's the ramping movement speed and it's probably a headache. But as it stands, the ability either needs an increase in range in general, or an increase in range from how many parts of a wall you travel through, so that it actually rewards you for going through a wall instead of punishing you by giving you a restriction on what kind of play you can make with your best ability. Now, the reason I call this champion a failed bouncer, it's mostly because you look tough, you look intimidating, you deal with two situations, and then you're out of breath. You run out of things to do, you run out of reasons for everybody to actually be intimidated by you. And once you lose that, you're kind of a pushover. You're just sitting down, you're taking deep breaths, and everybody's making fun of you because there's nothing more that you can add on to a fight. And that's my biggest problem with this character. You're so front-loaded in what you can do, and so unreliable in what you can front-load, that you're just ignorable. All in all, a 7 out of 7 Bracken experience, dead on arrival, as it stands.